Hi, everybody. I am very excited to talk about this book today for this review. This is Life on the Silent Planet, which is put out by Davenant Press. Thank you to Davenant for sending me a copy for review. This is a collection of essays edited by Readability. So there's a bunch of different writers, which I'll comment a little bit on some of the specific essays as I get into the review. But this is about C.S. Lewis's Ransom trilogy. So I'm going to take you through the typical format I do, the main idea of this book, the research behind it, although there's not going to be a ton to say on the research specifically for this one, the readability of the style, and then just my general reactions, all told. But before I get into the main idea, I want to say that I am a huge fan of Lewis's Ransom trilogy. I'm trying to correct myself, I'm trying to stop saying space trilogy. They argue in this book to stop calling it the space trilogy, and they make a persuasive case. So it's the Ransom trilogy. If you're familiar with it, it's Lewis's quasi-science fiction, fantastical trilogy. It's much less well-known than Narnia, but I've loved it for a long time, and was very excited about what this book was going to be kind of commenting on. So anyways, that's how I'm coming into this. I'm a huge booster of Lewis's science fiction trilogy, so I'm primed. I'm just like a prime kind of reviewer, reader of this particular book. So, I'll comment more on that as I go through, but I wanted to put that out there up front. This is going to be a very positive review. I'm a very, very, very big fan of this collection of essays. But let's dive in. So, this book is about Lewis's Ransom trilogy, but specifically it's somewhat commentary. It's also a thematic study. But it's specifically about a couple of sub-themes that run through the whole trilogy. Most prominently, reading the trilogy as Lewis's fierce criticism of modernity and some of the trajectories that Lewis saw taking root in modernity in the West as early as, Out of the Silent Planet came out in 1938, which is technically a year before World War II even started. So that's a really interesting historical contextualization. But Lewis had fierce concerns about trajectories he saw related to technology, even predicting things like transhumanism and colonization of space, and bureaucratization of science and technology and what that does to the human spirit. He also had really interesting concerns about how all these things would relate to human identity related to gender, which is really interesting in our moment to look back on those things. And these are the themes that these essay writers go back to again and again through the course of this book. So what this book does, you can read it as a companion piece to the trilogy, which might actually be a really good way to experience it because it's organized related to the three books of the trilogy. So there's 3 essays each on Out of the Silent Planet and Perelandra, which used to be my favorite book of the trilogy, but I'm not so sure if it's my favorite anymore. There are 6 essays devoted to That Hideous Strength, which is the 3rd volume of the trilogy. And there are so many more essays devoted to that because it is more than twice as long as the other 2. So some of the themes there are repeated discussions of technology, of bureaucracy, of gender. Like, these are themes that come back in each essay, but the essays are not overly I did not find them overly repetitive. Sometimes there can be a little bit of that can happen in these essay collections, but I'll comment more on that in the readability section. But that's what this book is. It's a collection of disparate contributions of essayists that are commenting on and unpacking deeper themes of Lewis's Ransom trilogy. And specifically, there's kind of a practical, ethical edge to a lot of this work. The subtitle is Essays on Christian Living, so it has this thrust of how should Christians think about cultural issues, and how might Lewis's work in the Ransom trilogy equip us with language and kind of narrative tools to think at a deeper level about where culture is headed and how we might respond, how might we live in response to it. So there's an ethical, practical edge to a lot of these essays. They're not just abstract. They're kind of a blend of abstract cultural theory and commentary plus considerations for actual practical Christian living. I think it's a really great balance of those two things. And it serves as, like I said, a commentary for helping the reader maybe understand and work through what Lewis is doing in the Ransom trilogy, which is notoriously a little weird, a little bizarre, and can be quite bewildering to someone who loves Narnia and just picks up the Ransom trilogy thinking they're going to get another easy to jump into fictional experience is going to be really, really disappointed by that. And this book also helps to parse out and unpack and help the reader kind of get through the Ransom trilogy, I think. So lots of potential ways to recommend this, which I'll get to at the end in my reaction. But that's what Life on the Silent Planet is about. So let's talk a little bit about the research really briefly. These contributors are pulled from a pool of people who know Lewis really well. And that's the primary thing I want to say about the research, is that these writers know Lewis's work very well, not just the well-trod Narnia, Screwtape, Mere Christianity aspect of Lewis's writings, but they know his letters, they know his academic work in medieval literature, they know the abolition of man comes up a lot because it's kind of Lewis's philosophical nonfiction counterpart to the Ransom trilogy, so they pull in quotes and themes from the abolition of man quite a bit and explain what's going on in that book as well, which is very helpful. But the primary area of research really is Lewis himself. There are some of them, Michael Ward is a contributor, Holly Ordway is a contributor, who also have specialties kind of in more of that medieval cosmological and also myth and legend. Like Arthur legends, for example, figure prominently in Holly Ordway's essay. So some of them bring in their scholarly expertise in a couple areas, secondary areas outside of Lewis's writings, but the primary research that's actually being drawn on is Lewis's writings. So you also get a tour of Lewis outside of what he's most well known for, which again are his children's fiction in Narnia and his apologetics work in Screwtape and Mere Christianity. So you get a big dose of Lewis basically outside of just as well known writings that he's most popular for. Really, really solid, but don't expect. These are all relatively short essays, so none of them are dissertations or literature reviews of stuff outside, but they do draw deeply on the well of Lewis's writings. So that's what the research looks like. And the readability, I'm really happy to say these are super readable essays. Just a comment on essay collections in general. I have a very mixed kind of experience with books like this that are collected essays from different writers, because sometimes writers have such different styles that you'll have a very, very hit or miss experience from one essay to the next. Sometimes essay collections are super repetitive, like they'll just go back over to the same ideas and the same themes. And there are a few quotes from some of the Ransom books. There are a few quotes that are brought out a lot, and ideas that are brought out. They are brought out over and over, but they did not stray into repetitive territory because each essay does have a kind of clear thesis or a clear purpose or a clear theme it's commenting on, and so they did not overlap unnecessarily in my reading of it. Also, it's put together in such a way, the essays are not overly long, the type is larger maybe than a normal a normal academic-ish book, and so I just found it really enjoyable to read. There are footnotes on each page, which I really like more than endnotes, because they can bracket out. Some of the footnotes have quite long commentary on secondary sources, and you can read that if you want or not. So all of that just goes together to, I think that the editor did a great job at making this a relatively seamless reading experience, even though they are from different writers. Of course, I should say, if it's not clear by now, my enthusiasm for the Space Trilogy propelled my own reading of this book, because I came into this, and this will be relevant potentially to you as the viewer of this video. If you love the Lewis Ransom trilogy already, you will probably love the way these writers unpack those themes, and so I kept finding myself learning these. It was like uncovering new themes and insights of these books I already loved. Now, on the other side of the coin, if you hate or struggle with Lewis's trilogy, I honestly don't know. I don't know whether or not to recommend this from a readability viewpoint. I could see someone who has really struggled. I honestly could see someone who's really struggled with that trilogy, this book unlocking it for them in a way. I also am not sure it would move the needle. I really don't know. I have a hard time judging that because I have such enthusiasm for them already. But as someone who loved those books already, I found this book super readable, and I was just so excited to learn each new essay insight, what it would talk about. So it really propelled me to read the book pretty quickly, actually. And that puts me into my reaction now. I really love this book. I adored this book, and I'm gonna qualify my reaction here by saying I already loved Lewis's Ransom trilogy, and so this actually deepened my love of it. And as someone who I felt like I would say, I try to say this as humbly as possible, I felt like I relatively understood what Lewis was doing in that trilogy, but this book showed me how little I understood of how the depths at which Lewis was reaching in that trilogy, and the stuff he was commenting on is downright prescient and prophetic. As early as 1938, the things he was predicting about the trajectory of modernity's influence on the human condition and the human spirit, and where we would go with science and technology and institutions, it is it is downright remarkable how spot on he was with so many things in what he was doing with that trilogy thematically. Really amazing. And this book shines a light on all of that and uncovers so much of that, even for me as someone who really enjoyed and thought I generally could kind of see what Lewis was doing. So it deepened my love of the trilogy. I hope that a book like this might be a gateway and a door for other people to similarly develop a deep love and appreciation of the less celebrated Ransom trilogy. I hope for that. I think it could do that, and I think if you're a reader who likes Lewis and has wanted to like this Ransom trilogy, this book very well could be the thing that pushes you over the edge, helps you get through it. I could very easily imagine reading it alongside those volumes, like reading the 3 essays about Of the Silent Planet even before you read Out of the Silent Planet. I could see that helping you wrap your mind around what's going on there. And I do want to comment on a couple of the essays specifically. So one area in this book that touches kind of a cultural third rail are the essays that talk about gender. So that's a repeated theme that comes up because, as the writers compellingly argue, gender is a major theme in the Ransom trilogy. The first book, he goes to Mars, which thematically talks about masculinity. The second book, he goes to Venus, which thematically talks about femininity. And then the third book stays on Earth and talks about matrimony and the combination of masculinity and femininity. So that is just an undeniable major theme in these books, and the way Lewis talks about gender is pretty diametrically opposed to a lot of cultural discourse today, particularly in transgender discussions, transgender theorizing, transgender discourse. He's just coming at a radically different place, and these writers are arguing for a kind of recovery of what Lewis was arguing there, which in some cases is, some people will pigeonhole Lewis incorrectly for his stances on these things. And it takes a lot of deep understanding to get what he's actually really arguing about gender. And it's really quite powerful and quite worth wrestling with, but it is just a lightning rod in our culture right now. Obviously, many of you will know that. And so it's worth knowing that it's in this book. And on that line, I want to say that one of the essays that sticks out to me is near the end. It's by Susanna Black Roberts is her name. And she comments on the well-known so-called problem of Susan, which is something that writers like Philip Pullman and Neil Gaiman have critiqued about the Narnia books, saying they don't really like the trajectory of Susan's character. She argues in a really, really good essay that is a wild mischaracterization of what Lewis, the way that they push back on Lewis's characterization of Susan is a wild misunderstanding of what he was actually doing with his female and male characters in these fictional books. And to understand what Lewis is actually doing takes a really full and robust read of the Ransom trilogy and what he's doing with gender and themes like matrimony and family and childbearing and masculinity and femininity in those books. And I think she does a pretty excellent job at refuting that pop understanding that Lewis was just this kind of misogynist who didn't like feminine sexuality and found it gross and just wanted to rebut it and dismiss it and shallowly characterized his female characters. I just think that is wildly bad reading of Lewis, and that essay does a great job there. But that's just one theme. The gender theme is one theme in this book. This book discusses at great length technology, transhumanism, the idea of keeping us alive outside of our bodies as an outworking of modernity. It discusses, there's a fantastic essay at the end by Jake Meador from Mere Orthodoxy on bureaucratic speech that absolutely nails what Lewis was doing with the way he portrayed overly bureaucratized institutions and what they do with language to obfuscate reality and to dodge any sort of moral clarity. Wow, that kind of stuff is happening all over our culture right now, and Lewis predicted it with aplomb in this trilogy. there is so many insights like that that relate to our culture today, and I am so wildly enthusiastic about this book's effort to reclaim this fiction trilogy from Lewis. And I love the way it's put together. I love the readability of it. I just love so much about it, again, because I already loved those fictional books from Lewis, and now I love them even deeper, which is not something I realized I don't know. It's not something I realized could happen. And so this book of essays really, really played a part in that for me. So this is a super enthusiastic review. Hopefully I've, positioned my love of this book well enough that you can tell whether or not you're going to resonate along these same lines as I did. But I really do highly recommend and encourage getting this book if you are like me in your love of C.S. Lewis's fictional trilogy about Ransom. Wow, there's so much here. So much I didn't even comment on, but I will leave that to you to discover if you pick up the book and read and discover it on your own. So, as always, thanks for taking a few minutes to watch.